The cage stood behind a shuttered training barn half buried in Wyoming snow. Inside it, a German shepherd mother had wrapped her body around 4 puppies to keep them alive. There was no clean water, no bedding, and the food bowl had been empty long enough to freeze to the floor. Retired Navy SEAL Jonah Mercer had seen neglect before, but not something this deliberate. Then the mother dog obeyed a military hand signal. No family pet should have known. What Jonah found beneath the scars in her ear would connect the cage to a company he had once helped protect. Stay with us, because saving those puppies would cost him the last thing he still believed he owned: his good name. The chain on the rear gate was moving before Jonah Mercer heard the dog. It was not swinging in the wind. The wind had gone down before dawn, leaving the hills north of Lander under the heavy quiet that follows a Wyoming snowstorm. The links shifted in short, uneven jerks, then stopped. A second later, they moved again. Jonah stood beside his pickup with one gloved hand on the open door and watched the gate. The property belonged to North Star Working Dogs, a training and breeding operation spread across 60 acres of fenced pasture. Low kennels and 2 long barns, painted the color of dried blood. He had been hired to inspect the private access road after the storm pushed 3 feet of snow across the lower switchback. North Star had a shipment scheduled for Monday. The owner did not want insurance delays. Jonah had not agreed to inspect the animals. He had told himself that twice during the drive up. The chain jerked again. He shut the truck door and crossed the packed snow. His left shoulder ached beneath his canvas coat, an old injury warning him of a temperature drop. The brass dog whistle in his coat pocket clicked against his keys. He caught it between 2 fingers and held it still. Behind the gate, a narrow service lane ran along the back of the main training barn. Snow had drifted against the wall almost to the window ledges. The official kennel building sat 100 yards away, heated, camera monitored, and clean enough for visiting clients. Jonah had toured it 18 months earlier, when North Star hired him to review locks, lighting response, routes, and perimeter security. This lane had not been on the tour. He unhooked the chain. It had not been locked, only looped twice through the metal bars. That was wrong in a place where a loose working dog could reach the county road in less than 4 minutes. The sound came again. Not a bark, a low scrape followed by the quick, thin cry of something very young. Jonah moved along the barn boots, breaking through the top crust of snow. Near the far corner, he found a blue construction tarp tied between 2 fence posts. A bulge showed beneath it. Snow covered the upper half, but the lower edge had been dragged inward and chewed into ragged strips. He stopped 10 feet away. The smell reached him first. Urine. Wet fur. Old metal. Underneath it was the sour smell of an empty stomach. Jonah pulled the tarp aside. A kennel cage sat directly on the frozen ground. It was the kind used for short transport, not long confinement, built from welded wire with a shallow metal pan beneath it. The pan was rimmed with ice. A dented water bowl lay on its side, dry except for a white crust. The food bowl had frozen to the floor. Inside, a German shepherd stood over 4 puppies. She was sable, mostly gray and black, with silver already showing around her muzzle. Her ribs made clean shadows beneath her coat. One rear leg trembled. She did not bark when Jonah appeared. She lowered her head and looked at him through the wire ears, forward body angled so every puppy remained behind her. The puppies were small enough that Jonah guessed 5 weeks, perhaps 6. Their coats were dull. One pressed against the mother's foreleg and shivered without waking. Another lifted its head, opened its mouth, and made the weak sound Jonah had heard from the lane. He had seen dogs frightened into noise. He had seen dogs trained into silence. This one was silent by choice. Jonah crouched without coming closer. "Easy," he said. The mother's eyes moved from his face to his hands. Not wild. Evaluating. He pulled off one glove and held his bare hand where she could see it. There were scars across 2 knuckles and a pale seam near his thumb. The cold bit immediately, but he kept his fingers relaxed. "I'm not reaching in." "Not yet." Her nose worked. The puppies shifted behind her. She looked down at them, touched the nearest one with her muzzle, then returned her attention to Jonah. He studied the latch. A padlock joined the cage door to the frame. The lock was new. The cage was not. Rust had spread from the lower welds, and several wires were bent inward, as though the dog had thrown her weight against them more than once. Above the cage, mounted beneath the barn, Eva's small black camera pointed directly at the door. Jonah straightened and looked toward the main buildings. No tire tracks crossed the fresh snow. The storm had ended 6 hours earlier. Whoever had last come through had done so before the road drifted shut. He took out his phone. One bar of service flickered, disappeared, and returned. He opened the contact for Grant Voss, North Star's owner, but did not press call. Grant had spoken to him at 5:30 that morning. Check the road. Check the generator shed. Do not enter any kennel buildings. Staff will return when the county plow clears the lower pass. Nothing about a dog behind the barn. Jonah walked back to the truck and opened the emergency box under the rear seat. He took out 2 wool blankets, a gallon jug of water, a folding bowl, a bag of high-calorie trail mix, and the compact bolt cutters he carried during winter road inspections. He left the trail mix. Too much salt. In the cab, he found 2 packets of plain chicken he had bought for lunch and a sealed sleeve of crackers. When he returned, the mother had not changed position. Jonah poured a small amount of water into the folding bowl and placed it outside the cage 3 feet from the door. Then he stepped back. She watched the water. She did not move. One puppy crawled forward between her legs. The mother blocked it with her chest and nudged it back. "That's good," Jonah said quietly. "You keep doing that." He tore the chicken into small pieces, laid them in the second folding bowl, and pushed it close enough for her to smell. Her nostrils widened. Saliva gathered at one side of her mouth, but she did not break position. Jonah had trained beside working dogs overseas, though he had never been a handler. He knew enough to recognize discipline that remained after exhaustion had stripped everything else away. He also knew a pet dog did not stand like that. He shifted his weight and raised his empty right hand palm down. Then, without thinking through why he made an old hand signal used to call a trained dog into heel, the mother's reaction was immediate. Her body tightened. She stepped once to her left, aligning her shoulder with an invisible handler's leg, then caught herself and swung back in front of the puppies. The movement lasted less than a second. It was enough. Jonah lowered his hand. "Who trained you?" The dog stared at him. He crouched again and looked more closely at her head. The inner surface of her left ear showed a patch of scar tissue darker than the surrounding skin. It was not a bite scar. It had a rectangular shape, with several black marks still visible beneath a pale burn. Someone had tried to remove a tattoo. He took a photograph through the wire. The camera above the cage gave a small mechanical click and adjusted its angle. Jonah looked up. The lens had moved. Someone was watching. He called Grant. The line rang twice. "You found the drift?" Grant asked. His voice was clear, awake, and irritated before Jonah said a word. "I found a dog behind your south barn." There was a pause. Not surprise. Calculation. "You were told not to enter the kennel area. She's in a transport cage outside. 4 puppies with her. No water. No bedding. That unit isn't part of your inspection." Jonah looked at the dog. She had shifted one rear foot off the ice and was holding it slightly raised. "How long have they been out here?" "They're under veterinary observation. In 16-degree weather. The temperature at the cage is monitored." Jonah glanced at the camera. "Then you already know the water bowl is empty." Grant exhaled through his nose. "Jonah, listen carefully. That female has a history of unpredictable aggression. She cannot be housed near the primary kennel population. The pups are being evaluated. Staff were delayed by the storm. I have somebody on the way. The road is buried. Nobody's on the way. The county will clear it. Not for another 4 hours, maybe 6. Then leave the property and let my staff handle it." The mother dog lowered her head to the smallest puppy and licked ice crystals from its back. Jonah said, "What's her name?" Another pause. "She doesn't have one. She's breeding stock." The brass whistle felt heavy in Jonah's pocket. "You have 30 minutes, he said. "For what?" "To get a veterinarian up here, or authorize me to transport all 5 animals to the emergency clinic in town." Grant's voice changed. The irritation went away. What replaced it was calm, almost friendly. "I know you take dogs personally. I read the service summary before I hired you. But you are standing on private property outside the scope of your contract, interfering with animals that belong to my company. Do not turn an emotional reaction into a criminal decision." Jonah stared at the cage door. Years earlier, in a village whose name he still did not speak aloud, A working dog had gone down beside a collapsed wall. Gunfire had cut the alley in half. Jonah had received the order to pull back. The handler was dead. The dog was wounded. Jonah had looked at the animal for perhaps 2 seconds before obeying. The order had been correct. The decision had lived with him anyway. 20 minutes, Jonah said, and ended the call. He did not expect help to come. He did expect Grant to send someone who could protect the company. Jonah set the phone on the snow with the voice recorder running. He spoke the date, time, location, weather, and condition of the animals. He photographed the bowls, the ice under the cage, the puppies, the mother's ribs, and the lock. He moved around the cage slowly, keeping his shoulders turned away from the dog whenever possible. At the rear, the tarp concealed a small electric space heater mounted on a wooden block. Its cord ran through a cracked window into the barn. The heater was switched off. A digital thermometer hung above it. The display read 58 degrees. Jonah touched the probe wire. It ended in a loop behind the heater less than 6 inches from a chemical hand warmer taped to the wall. The camera did not monitor the cage temperature. It monitored a falsified reading. He photographed that too. The mother dog watched him return to the front. Her breathing had become shallow. One puppy began rooting against her belly. She shifted to allow it access, though her own legs trembled harder. Jonah looked at the road. No engine, no plow, no staff. He checked the time. 12 minutes had passed. The responsible choice was to call the sheriff, wait for a warrant, or an animal control officer preserve the scene and remain outside the cage. He knew that. He had written risk procedures for other people who faced decisions exactly like this, but the smallest puppy no longer shivered. That frightened him more than movement would have. Jonah called the county emergency line. Dispatch answered and told him the animal control officer was snowed in west of town. A deputy might reach North Star after the plow opened the pass. Estimated response, 2 to 3 hours. The puppy may not have 2 hours, Jonah said. Do not enter the enclosure if the adult animal is aggressive, the dispatcher told him. The owner has reported a dangerous dog at that address. The report had already been made. Grant was building the record. Jonah thanked the dispatcher and ended the call. He stood in the snow listening to the dog breathe. Then he removed the brass whistle from his pocket. It was dented along one edge and darkened by years of handling. It had belonged to Aaron Vale, the handler who died beside the wounded dog Jonah left behind. Jonah had carried it through retirement, 2 moves, a divorce, and every consulting job after. He had never used it. He did not use it now. He slipped it back into his coat and picked up the bolt cutters. The mother dog rose higher over her puppies. Her lips did not lift, but a low warning moved through her chest. I know, Jonah said. You have no reason to trust me. He set the cutters against the lock. The camera clicked above him. But I'm not leaving you here. He squeezed. The first bite dented the steel shackle without breaking it. The sound made the puppies cry. The mother lunged, once striking the cage door with both front feet. Jonah stepped back, waited for her to settle, and placed the cutters again. The second bite snapped the lock. He did not open the door. Instead, he laid one blanket on the snow and spread the second over it, making a dry surface. He pushed the water and chicken closer. Then he sat down 5 feet away, turned his body sideways, and waited. The cage door remained closed but unlocked. The mother sniffed along the gap. Jonah could see the conflict in every small movement. Thirst against caution. Weakness against duty. She looked at the puppies. She looked at him. He raised his right hand and gave a different signal. Release. Her ears moved forward. Slowly, she touched the door with her nose. It swung open 3 inches. The dog backed away, startled by the movement. Jonah kept still. After nearly a minute, she pushed again. This time, she stepped out with one paw, then another. Her rear leg nearly folded, but she caught herself. She did not go to the food. She turned and took the smallest puppy, gently by the loose skin at its neck. She carried it out, placed it on the blanket, and returned to the cage. One by one, she brought out all 4. Only after every puppy lay together on the wool did she lower her head to the water. She drank twice, stopped, and looked at Jonah. Then she nudged the bowl toward the puppies. Something in Jonah's chest tightened with such force that he had to look away. A vehicle engine sounded beyond the gate. Not the county plow. Too light. Too fast. The mother heard it too. She stepped over the puppies and faced the service lane. Her posture changed. The exhaustion remained, but training moved through it like current through a damaged wire. A black utility vehicle rounded the barn corner. Grant Voss sat in the passenger seat. Beside him was a uniformed security contractor, Jonah, recognized from North Star's front office. Grant got out before the vehicle stopped moving. His expensive parka was open at the throat. Snow dusted his polished boots. He took in the broken lock, the open cage, the blankets, and Jonah sitting beside the animals. Then he smiled without warmth. "You always did mistake disobedience for courage," he said. Jonah rose. The mother dog moved with him. Grant's eyes narrowed at that. "Step away from my property," he said. Jonah looked down at the dog, at the burned tattoo inside her ear, and at the 4 puppies pressed beneath her body. "Tell me her name," he said again. Grant glanced at the camera overhead. "There isn't one." The dog turned toward Jonah's right hand. Without speaking, he made the heel signal once more. She stepped to his side. Grant's smile vanished. Grant Voss did not look at the puppies when he ordered Jonah to put the mother back in the cage. He kept his attention on Jonah's hands, as if the broken padlock were more important than the dog standing over 4 shivering bodies. The security contractor beside him, a thick-necked man named Mason Pike, rested one hand near the radio clipped to his vest. "You heard me," Grant said. "Secure the animal and leave." Jonah glanced at the black utility vehicle. No veterinary kit. No blankets. No heated crate. The rear compartment held 2 plastic carriers and a coil of restraint poles. "You told me staff were coming to care for them." "They are." "That's not care." Grant's jaw tightened. "You don't know what protocol applies to that female." The mother dog stood against Jonah's right leg without touching him. Her breathing remained shallow, but her eyes never left Mason. When he shifted his weight toward the blanket, she lowered her head. Jonah raised one palm. "Nobody reaches for the puppies." Mason gave a humorless laugh. "You're on private property, Mercer." "So are they." "That doesn't make this legal." Grant stepped closer, careful to remain outside the dog's reach. "I have a state breeding license, federal transport registration, and a veterinary supervision agreement. You have a road inspection contract, and a history of making poor decisions when dogs are involved. Which one of us do you think the sheriff will believe?" The words were chosen to strike a place Grant had learned about from Jonah's service summary. He did not know the whole story. He knew enough to use it. Jonah felt the brass whistle in his pocket and forced his fingers away from it. "I documented the cage," he said. The heater was off. The temperature probe was taped to a hand warmer. For the first time, Grant looked toward the rear of the enclosure. It was only a glance, but Jonah saw it. Mason saw it too. "The probe must have shifted," Grant said. "It didn't shift under duct tape." The smallest puppy gave a weak cough. The mother turned at once, nose moving over its ribs. Her attention broke from Mason for no more than 2 seconds. Grant used those 2 seconds. "Take the adult," he told Mason. Mason reached for a restraint pole. Jonah moved between him and the blanket. He did not raise his voice. "Don't." Mason stopped, not because of the warning, but because Jonah's posture had changed. The retired SEAL no longer looked like a contractor arguing over policy. His feet were set. His shoulders were loose. His weight rested slightly forward. Grant looked from Jonah to the dog. "This is exactly what I warned the county about," he said. "You are emotionally compromised. The puppy needs heat. Then stand aside. Bring a veterinarian." Grant took out his phone. "I'm calling the sheriff." "Do it." The answer surprised him. Jonah bent slowly and gathered the edges of the blanket around the puppies. The mother watched his hands. When he lifted the bundle, she pressed her nose against the wool, counted each small body by scent, and followed. Mason stepped across the lane. Jonah did not stop. "If you touch me while I'm carrying them, your camera records that too." Grant looked up at the lens. The security contractor moved aside. Jonah reached his pickup and lowered the puppies into the passenger footwell where the heater would reach them fastest. The mother placed both front feet on the running board, but hesitated at the open door. Her rear legs shook harder now. "Come on," Jonah said. He tapped the seat once and gave the hand signal for load. She climbed in. That single obedient movement changed Grant's face more than the broken lock had. "Where did you learn that signal?" he asked. Jonah closed the door. "Same place she did." He walked around the hood. Grant blocked the driver's side. If you leave with those dogs, I will report a felony theft. Their documented value exceeds $70,000. Then put that number in the report. You think service makes you untouchable. No. Jonah looked through the windshield at the mother dog, standing over the puppies. I think they're dying. He opened the door. Grant did not move. For a moment the two men stood close enough that Jonah could smell coffee on Grant's breath. He remembered meeting him 18 months earlier in the front office where framed photographs showed German Shepherds wearing tactical harnesses beside police officers and private security teams. Grant had spoken about standards, readiness, and protecting handlers from weak breeding lines. Jonah had believed much of it. He had wanted to believe it. You signed my security certification, Grant said quietly. Remember that before you decide what story you want to tell. Jonah looked at him. Move Mason spoke into his radio. County unit is en route. Grant stepped aside. Jonah got in and drove. The access road was worse than it had been an hour earlier. Wind had begun lifting loose powder from the ridge, filling his tire tracks almost as quickly as he made them. The pickup pushed through the first drift frame, scraping packed snow. In the passenger footwell, the puppies lay wrapped together beneath the heater vent. Their mother stood over them, bracing against every turn. Jonah kept one hand on the wheel and used the other to call the emergency veterinary clinic in Lander. The recorded message transferred him to an answering service. A woman told him the on-call veterinarian could meet him, but the county plow had not reached North Star Road. I can get down, Jonah said. He hoped it was true. At the lower switchback, the rear tires slid toward the ditch. Jonah eased off the accelerator, turned into the skid, and felt the truck settle against a ridge of snow. The mother dog shifted her weight before the movement, compensating like an animal accustomed to riding in unstable vehicles. The smallest puppy rolled free of the blanket. She caught it gently by the loose skin of its neck and returned it to the center of the bundle. You have done this before, Jonah said. Her eyes met his in the rearview mirror. The truck climbed out of the slide. 20 minutes later, Jonah reached the county road. The plow was working north, yellow lights flashing through blowing snow, but a sheriff's SUV waited on the cleared side with its grill angled across the lane. Sheriff Daniel Rourke stepped out. He was 61, broad through the middle, with a white mustache, and the patient expression of a man who had spent 30 years listening to neighbors accuse one another of moving fence posts. Jonah had known him for 6 years. They were not friends, but they had shared coffee after 2 winter rescues and once searched the foothills together for an elderly hunter. Rourke raised one hand. Kill the engine. Jonah stopped. The dog watched the sheriff through the windshield. Rourke approached the driver's window but remained outside arm's reach. Grant says you broke into a secured enclosure and removed 5 dogs after being told to leave. The enclosure wasn't secured until the padlock. The rear gate was chained but unlocked. Did you cut the padlock? Yes. Did you remove the dogs? Yes, Rourke sighed. That makes my morning difficult. Look at them. The sheriff glanced past Jonah. The mother dog did not growl. She simply placed herself between Rourke and the footwell. I see them, he said. The smallest one stopped shivering. The mother has no body reserves. There was no water. Grant says the dog is under supervised conditioning, and the camera shows you interfering with a feeding trial. He falsified the temperature reading. I have photographs. Rourke rubbed the side of his face. Animal control is still west of town. The veterinarian can examine them if we get them there. Until then, ownership is not in dispute. Condition is, Jonah, I need you to understand something. Grant filed a dangerous animal notice before he called me. He says the female has bitten 2 staff members. If I open that door and she comes out, I may be required to put her down. The words landed with the force Grant intended when he created the report. Jonah looked at the dog. She had not shown her teeth once. Even when the lock snapped, she had struck the door, not him. But the sheriff did not know that. The paperwork gave him a different animal. Let me take them to the clinic, Jonah said. You can follow. Rourke considered it. His radio crackled. A dispatcher relayed that Grant Voss was requesting immediate seizure of company property and charges for criminal trespass, theft, and destruction. The sheriff closed his eyes for a moment. Drive to your place. Jonah stared at him. Your barn has heat, propane heater and insulated walls. Take them there. Do not leave. Do not hide them. Do not allow anybody else to handle them. I'll get the vet and animal control to you as soon as the roads open. Grant will object. Grant is not wearing this badge. It was more help than Jonah expected. It was not protection. Rourke pointed a gloved finger through the window. And hear me clearly. If you move those dogs again, I will arrest you. I am giving you a temporary emergency hold based on observable weather conditions, not deciding ownership. Jonah nodded. Understood. The sheriff stepped back and let him pass. Jonah lived 8 miles south of town in a one-story house attached to a converted equipment barn. The property had belonged to his uncle who raised horses before his knees failed. Jonah had removed the stalls but kept the insulated tack room, a floor drain, and the old propane heater. He used the space for tools and winter gear. He parked inside and closed the large door before opening the truck. The mother dog jumped down despite her weak rear leg. She landed badly recovered, then turned to wait for the puppies. Jonah carried them in the blanket to a bed he made from folded horse pads near the heater. He placed water beside them and prepared a thin meal of warmed chicken broth and canned dog food from supplies left by a neighbor. He divided it into 5 small portions. The mother sniffed her bowl. Then she picked it up by the rim. She carried it to the puppies and tipped the food onto the blanket between them. Jonah stood very still. No, he said softly. That one's yours. He prepared another portion and moved it 6 feet away, creating distance between her meal and the puppies. She followed him but would not lower her head. Jonah sat on the concrete floor and turned away. They already have theirs. For several seconds there was only the hiss of the heater. Then he heard her eat. Not quickly. She took 2 bites, stopped to check the puppies, returned for 1 more, and checked again. A dog that had been fed reliably would not behave that way. A dog conditioned to believe food could disappear would. Jonah recorded the behavior on his phone. When the mother finished half the portion, she lay beside the puppies and cleaned each one. The smallest responded to the warmth, stretching one foreleg and making a stronger sound than before. Jonah allowed himself 1 breath of relief. His phone rang. Grant. Jonah answered on speaker and placed the phone on a workbench. You have made a serious mistake, Grant said. The dogs are warm. You removed animals in the middle of a controlled behavioral evaluation. You contaminated the environment, changed their feeding schedule, and exposed my company to liability. Your controlled evaluation left a puppy hypothermic. That is your interpretation. It's on video. So is your trespass. The mother dog raised her head at Grant's voice. Her ears flattened. She stood, moved in front of the puppies, and stared at the phone. Jonah noticed. She knows you, he said. Grant was silent. She heard your voice. Of course she knows me. She belongs to North Star. What's her name? You keep asking a sentimental question as though it changes ownership. It changes whether you ever treated her as a living animal. Grant's voice hardened. Sheriff Rourke will be at your property within the hour. I have provided documentation establishing value, aggression, history, and breeding status. When he arrives, you will surrender all 5 animals. If you resist, I will make certain your consulting license is reviewed, along with every certification carrying your signature. Jonah looked through the barn window. Snow moved across the yard in thin white sheets. You said staff were delayed by the storm, he replied. But you reached the cage in less than 20 minutes. No answer. You were already nearby. Were you watching the camera? Grant ended the call. The mother remained facing the phone after the screen went dark. A faint tremor ran from her shoulders to her hips. Jonah walked toward her and stopped at the distance she had accepted. He lowered himself to 1 knee. He is not taking them tonight, he said. The promise left his mouth before he had considered whether he could keep it. That was the old flaw, the one that wore the mask of competence. Jonah believed that if he carried enough risk himself, nobody else would have to suffer it. In the teams, that instinct had sometimes saved lives. Outside them, it had ended his marriage and cost him work. He took his phone and copied every photograph and recording to an encrypted drive. Then he sent duplicates to an attorney in Casper who had handled one of his contracts. The message read, Potential animal cruelty evidence. North Star working dogs. Preserve all attachments if I lose access. He did not send anything to the sheriff. Not yet. He told himself he needed to organize the evidence first. In truth, he did not trust that Grant's paperwork had not already reached every office that mattered. The mother dog watched him cross to the rear storage room. He opened a steel cabinet and took out an old military field crate. Inside were maps, notebooks, a broken watch, and the gear he had never managed to throw away. At the bottom lay a photograph of Aaron Vale, kneeling beside a black and tan shepherd named Rook. Jonah did not pick it up. He closed the crate and placed it beneath the workbench out of sight. A vehicle entered the driveway. The dog heard it first. She rose without sound and moved toward the barn door. Her rear leg almost failed, but she locked it straight. The 4 puppies stirred behind her. Jonah looked through the side window. Sheriff Rourke's SUV stopped outside. A second vehicle pulled in behind it, a North Star van. Grant stepped out with 2 employees and a stack of documents under one arm. Rourke got out more slowly. He did not look pleased. Jonah's phone buzzed with an incoming county alert. Search authorization. Emergency animal seizure. The mother dog turned from the window and looked at him. Jonah reached for the brass whistle in his pocket, then let his hand fall. He had promised Grant would not take them. Now keeping that promise might require the exact mistake Grant expected him to make. By the time Sheriff Rourke knocked, Jonah had moved the puppies into the heated tack room and left the mother dog loose in the main barn. It was not a hiding place. The tack room door stood open, and the animals were visible from the entrance. But the arrangement forced anyone who came inside to face the adult dog before reaching the litter. Jonah opened the side door before Rourke knocked a second time. The sheriff held the emergency seizure order in one hand. Grant stood 6 feet behind him, flanked by Mason Pike and a younger North Star employee carrying 2 plastic crates. "We're here to take possession," Grant said. Rourke glanced over his shoulder. "I am here to execute an order. You are here because the court recognizes you as the listed owner. Do not speak for me." Grant's expression barely changed. Jonah stepped aside. "Come in, Sheriff. Grant stays outside until you see the dogs." "You don't set the terms," Grant said. "On my property I set some of them." Rourke looked tired already. "Grant waits. Mason waits. I go in with Jonah. If I need assistance, I ask for it." The decision angered Grant, but he understood the value of appearing reasonable. He nodded once. Inside the barn, the mother dog stood beside the tack room entrance. The propane heater gave the space a dry warmth. Jonah had placed clean water in 2 bowls and fresh towels beneath the puppies. Their breathing had steadied. One had fallen asleep with its forepaws across another's neck. Rourke stopped 10 feet from the mother. "That's the dangerous animal?" he asked. "According to Grant. Has she tried to bite you?" "No," growled. "Once when I put the bolt cutters on the lock. Reasonable under the circumstances." The dog watched Rourke, then glanced at Jonah as though checking whether his presence had changed the rules. Jonah lowered his hand. She remained in place. Rourke examined the puppies without approaching. "They look better than the photographs you sent dispatch. They've had heat and fluids. That may complicate proving their original condition." "I documented everything. Grant has documentation too." The sheriff held up the order. It named North Star as owner and described Jonah as a contractor who had unlawfully removed animals from a controlled facility. The judge had authorized seizure, pending veterinary review. "I can delay transport until the veterinarian arrives," Rourke said. "I cannot ignore this." Jonah looked toward the open barn door. Grant was visible through the glass, reading something on his phone. "What veterinarian?" "Dr. Lena Ortiz. She is on her way from town. Not North Star's contractor. Independent." That mattered. Jonah nodded. "Then they stay warm until she examines them." Rourke relaxed slightly. He had expected a fight. The mother dog stepped away from the tack room and approached the sheriff with slow, careful movements. Jonah did not call her back. She stopped beyond arm's reach, sniffed the air near Rourke's coat, and looked at the leather gloves tucked into his belt. Rourke remained still. "She reads hands," Jonah said. "Do not reach over her head." "Wasn't planning to." The dog sniffed once more, then returned to the puppies. Rourke lowered his voice. "Grant says you have a personal history affecting your judgment. Grant knows what was in a summary he purchased with a background check. Is any of it relevant?" Jonah looked at the dog's scarred ear. "Maybe. That doesn't make the cage acceptable." The sheriff did not push. 25 minutes later, Dr. Ortiz arrived in a four-wheel drive clinic vehicle. She was in her late 50s, compact and deliberate, with snow caught in the dark braid over one shoulder. Grant tried to meet her in the driveway, but she walked past him after saying, "I will hear everyone's statement after I see the animals." She examined the puppies first. The mother dog allowed it, only because Jonah sat on the floor beside the towels. Each time Ortiz lifted a puppy, the dog touched Jonah's shoulder with her nose, then watched the veterinarian's hands. The smallest puppy had low blood sugar, mild dehydration, and a temperature still below normal. The others showed signs of underfeeding and prolonged cold exposure. Could this be part of a supervised conditioning program, Rourke asked. Ortiz looked at him over her glasses. "Not one I would sign my name to." Grant heard from the doorway. "Doctor, you have not reviewed the protocol, and you have not been invited inside. Those animals belong to my company. At this moment, they belong to my examination." Jonah almost smiled. Ortiz turned to the mother. "This one will be harder." The dog would not lie down on command. She had learned enough about commands to distrust the people giving them. Jonah moved to her side, kept his hand low, and waited. After a full minute, she lowered herself beside the puppies. Ortiz ran her fingers along the dog's ribs, joints, teeth, and abdomen. The examination revealed old pressure sores under new fur, a healing wound near the right hip, and evidence of repeated pregnancies. When Ortiz reached the dog's left ear, she frowned. "This scar is deliberate," she said. Jonah nodded. "I thought so. Someone tried to destroy an identification tattoo." Grant stepped into the barn. "That is speculation." The mother dog rose so quickly that Ortiz nearly lost her balance. Jonah caught the veterinarian's elbow. The dog moved between them and Grant, body rigid, ears flat. Grant stopped. "She reacts to you," Jonah said. "She reacts to dominant male voices. That is documented." "Where?" "In her behavior file, the same file that calls her breeding stock." Grant looked at Rourke. "Sheriff, this is becoming unsafe." Ortiz straightened. "The unsafe condition existed before I arrived." Rourke stepped between Grant and the examination area. "Outside." Now Grant's face colored, but he obeyed. Ortiz waited until the door closed. Then she inspected the scar again with a magnifying light. "There are still characters under the burn. Maybe 5 digits. Possibly a letter." "Can you read them?" Jonah asked. "Not here. I can photograph under filtered light and compare the pattern." The sheriff rubbed his mustache. "Does the tattoo affect seizure?" "It affects ownership," Ortiz said. "If this dog was previously registered to a military or law enforcement program, North Star's papers may not be the whole story." A knock sounded at the side door. Everyone turned. A woman stood outside in a green parka, one hand raised where they could see it. She was thin, pale from cold, and carrying a weatherproof document case against her chest. Jonah did not recognize her. The mother dog did. She made a sound low in her throat, not a warning this time. Something closer to recognition. The woman heard it through the door. Her face changed. "Her name is Mara," she said through the glass. Grant shouted from the driveway, "Do not let her inside." Rourke opened the door halfway. "Who are you?" "Elise Warren. I worked for North Star." "You were terminated for theft," Grant called. Elise's mouth tightened. "I copied records. I did not steal dogs." Rourke looked at Jonah, then at Ortiz. The mother pushed her nose against the opening in the door. Elise lowered one hand. "Mara," she whispered. The dog did not wag her tail. She did not rush forward. She stood still, scenting the woman, then gave one short exhale and stepped back. It was more recognition than she had given anyone else. Rourke let Elise in. She placed the document case on the workbench and kept her hands visible. "I was a veterinary technician at North Star for 4 years. I filed 2 internal reports about this dog. The first disappeared. The second cost me my job." Grant struck the outside of the door with his palm. "She signed a non-disclosure agreement." Ortiz glanced toward the sound. "That agreement does not prevent reporting animal cruelty." "There was no cruelty." Elise opened the case. "Then you should not mind us reviewing the feeding logs." Inside were printed schedules, photographs, and handwritten notes. The official sheets showed regular meals, heated housing, and weekly veterinary checks. Elise's notes told a different story. Cage dues. Female sable. Water removed at 1,800. Feed withheld 48 hours before response test. Litter remained with dam to increase protective drive. Rourke read the last line twice. Increase protective drive, he said. Elise nodded. Grant believed maternal defense could be intensified and passed to the puppies through early stress. He called it pressure inheritance. Ortiz's expression hardened. That is not a recognized humane protocol. It was never submitted for review. The documents used safer language. Environmental adaptation. Controlled resource exposure. Jonah looked at Mara. She had returned to the puppies and was licking the smallest one's ear. How long was she in that cage? Elise swallowed. This cycle, at least 19 days, maybe longer. The numbers settled over the barn. Grant shouted from outside that the notes were fabricated. Rourke stepped to the door and ordered Mason and the younger employee back to the North Star vehicle. Then he turned to Elise. Why come now? She looked at Jonah. Because he refused to sign a perimeter report 18 months ago. Jonah frowned. I signed the final certification after Grant fixed the emergency exits. Before that, you wrote that the camera archive had too much owner-level control and needed an independent backup. Grant complained about you for a week. Jonah remembered the argument. He had considered it routine. You thought that meant I was safe to trust. No, Elise said. I thought it meant you had annoyed the right man. The answer was blunt enough to be believable. Rourke picked up one of the photographs. It showed Mara in a clean indoor kennel with a red collar. The date stamp was 7 months earlier. On the wall behind her was a whiteboard listing a different identification number from the one in North Star's current ownership file. Where did you get this? He asked. Clinic tablet backup. Grant thought he erased it. Why didn't you bring it to law enforcement? I did. Rourke looked up. Elise held his gaze. I sent a packet to County Animal Control State Licensing and your office. The sheriff's face went still. When? November 3rd. Certified mail. Rourke looked toward the driveway where Grant stood beside his vehicle with his phone pressed to his ear. I never saw it, he said. Someone signed for it. Jonah watched the sheriff absorb that. The problem had grown beyond one cage. Ortiz photographed the scar under filtered light, while Elise held a small reflector. The first images showed only damaged skin. On the fourth attempt, several dark strokes emerged beneath the pale tissue. Elise leaned closer. K714. Maybe 6. Mara's head lifted at the sound of the partial number. Jonah noticed a second scar along her flank, half hidden by uneven fur. Ortiz parted the coat and found a curved surgical line near the lower ribs. Old chest procedure, she said. Not routine space surgery. Elise's face drained of color. Military working dogs sometimes receive that incision after thoracic injury. Sometimes, Ortiz cautioned. Not proof. Jonah raised his right hand and gave the heel signal. Mara stood and moved to his side. Then he tried a second signal, one used to send a trained dog behind cover. She looked toward the nearest solid wall, moved behind a support post and held position. Elise covered her mouth. Grant said she was an untrained brood female, she whispered. Jonah released Mara. She returned to the puppies. Rourke turned to the door. The seizure is suspended, pending identity verification and independent veterinary review. The dogs remain here under my authority. Grant does not enter this property. Outside, Grant lowered his phone. You do not have authority to suspend a judge's order. I have authority to preserve disputed evidence and prevent an unsafe transfer. You can challenge me in court. Grant's calm finally broke. Those puppies are scheduled for delivery. The admission hung in the cold air. Delivery to whom, Jonah asked. Grant realized too late that he had said too much. A licensed client. At 5 weeks old. They are not 5 weeks. Ortiz answered from inside. They are between 5 and 6. Grant looked at her, then at Elise. His gaze stopped on the document case. Mason Pike returned to the doorway. Boss County plow is turning around. Another band of snow is coming. Grant's eyes moved over the barn interior, measuring exits, people evidence, and the dog. Then he smiled again. You are all making decisions based on a frightened animal and a disgruntled former employee, he said. When the records are reviewed, this will look very different. He walked back to the vehicle. Rourke watched him go. He is not done. No, Jonah said. He is deciding what to erase. The sheriff called his office and ordered a deputy to secure North Star's main property as soon as the road opened. Elise helped Ortiz start fluids under the smallest puppy's skin. Jonah warmed towels in a dryer and carried them back one at a time. During the second trip, he found one of the larger puppies had crawled away from the litter and into his wool cap, which he had dropped near the heater. Only its hind legs and tail remained outside. Elise laughed before she could stop herself. It was a small sound, rusty from disuse. Jonah looked at the cap. That's government surplus. Then the government has finally found a good use for it. Even Rourke smiled. Mara approached the cap, sniffed the puppy, and then looked at Jonah. For the first time, the tension in her face eased. Jonah held out a piece of warmed food on his palm. She hesitated. Then she took it gently. No one spoke for several seconds. The warmth did not last. Elise's phone chimed. She opened an old database mirror she had accessed through a veterinary credential that had not yet expired. The partial tattoo number returned one archived result. She read the screen, then sat down on the edge of the workbench. "What is it?" Jonah asked. Elise turned the phone toward him. The record contained a photograph of a younger sable German shepherd wearing a military harness. The left ear was unscarred. The identification line read MWD MARAK 7146. Below it, in red capital letters, was a status entry dated 14 months earlier. Deceased medical complications following retirement transfer. Jonah looked from the record to the living dog beside the heater. Mara had food in her stomach, 4 puppies under her protection, and a death certificate in a federal database. The first video reached Jonah's phone before sunrise. It opened with a clean view from North Star's rear camera. Jonah appeared beneath the barn light, bolt cutters in hand, while a line of text identified him as a former military contractor trespassing during a behavioral trial. The clip showed him breaking the padlock. It did not show the empty water bowl, the taped temperature probe, or the puppies lying motionless behind Mara. The next angle showed Jonah loading the dogs into his truck. The caption read, "Armed veteran steals high-value working dogs after threatening staff." By 6:30, the clip had been shared through 3 local community pages. By 7, Grant Voss was speaking live on a regional morning broadcast from North Star's front gate. "We are deeply concerned for the animals," he said, wearing a dark coat embroidered with the company logo. "The female has a documented aggression history and requires structured handling. Mr. Mercer disregarded safety warnings because of unresolved personal trauma. We hope law enforcement can recover our dogs before anyone is hurt." Jonah watched from the barn workbench with the sound low. Mara lay in the tack room doorway, her head resting between her front paws. The 4 puppies slept against her belly beneath fresh towels. The smallest had begun nursing more strongly after fluids, but Dr. Ortiz had warned that the next 24 hours remained critical. Elise stood behind Jonah, arms crossed. "He had that statement prepared," she said. "Before he reached the cage, maybe before you arrived on the property." Jonah paused the video on Grant's concerned expression. North Star's public relations work was too polished for an improvised response. A photo of Jonah in service uniform appeared beside the video, followed by a cropped paragraph from an incident summary that mentioned operational stress and a disputed extraction. Grant had purchased more than a background report. He had prepared a weapon. Sheriff Rourke entered through the side door, stamping snow from his boots. "My office phones have been ringing since 5:40. Half the callers want me to arrest you. The other half want me to arrest Grant. Nobody has read a full sentence of evidence." Jonah turned off the broadcast. "Did your deputy secure North Star?" Rourke removed his hat. No, Elise stared at him. "Why not?" The road closed again. A fuel truck jackknifed below the pass. "My deputy reached the lower gate, but Grant's attorney produced an injunction limiting access until a state licensing representative arrives." "He bought time," Jonah said. "He used the law." Same result. Rourke set a folder on the workbench. "There is more." Inside was a copy of the security assessment Jonah had completed for North Star 18 months earlier. His signature appeared on the final page, beneath a statement that the company's camera system, controlled access areas, animal transfer routes, and emergency procedures met accepted commercial standards. Jonah read the paragraph twice. The words were his. I evaluated theft prevention and perimeter response, he said. Not animal care. The distinction won't survive, a headline Rourke replied. Grant's attorney claims your current accusations are an attempt to cover professional negligence. Elise took the report. This certification helped him renew the transport contract. Jonah looked at her. You knew about it. I knew a former SEAL reviewed the site. I did not know you signed this after questioning the archive controls. They installed the independent backup I requested. Did you verify it stayed independent? The question struck harder because it was fair. Jonah remembered the follow-up visit. Grant had demonstrated a secondary recorder in a locked network cabinet and shown a document stating that only the outside vendor held administrator access. Jonah had checked the physical enclosure, sampled camera feeds, and signed the report. He had not contacted the vendor. He had trusted the paper. No, he said. Elise placed the report down carefully. That certification is why state licensing stopped taking my complaint seriously. They said North Star had recently passed a security and compliance review by a respected veteran consultant. Compliance was not my scope. They used your name as though it was. And you think I knew? I don't know what you knew. Mara lifted her head at the change in their voices. Jonah saw the dog watching him and felt something old rise in his chest. The need to defend the decision, explain the limited information, prove that any reasonable person would have done the same. It was the same argument he had carried from the alley where Rook had been left behind. The order was correct. The information was incomplete. The outcome was not his intention. None of those sentences changed what happened. I should have checked, he said. Elise did not answer. Rourke pulled out a second document. The judge has reinstated the seizure order with a modification. Dr. Ortiz may examine the dogs at the county veterinary station, but they cannot remain on private property controlled by either claimant. That means moving them, Jonah said. Yes, the smallest puppy isn't stable. Ortiz says the station has better equipment. Jonah looked toward the tack room. Mara had shifted closer to the puppies. She watched Rourke's folder as though she understood it contained a decision about them. When? Within the hour. The county veterinary station occupied 2 rooms behind the animal control office near the highway. It had heated runs, an examination table, oxygen, and a small overnight area. Under normal circumstances, it would have been safer than Jonah's barn. These were not normal circumstances. Who controls access? He asked. Animal control. My office holds the evidence seal. North Star has no unsupervised access. Elise looked at Rourke, who signed for my complaint packet in November. The sheriff's face tightened. I am checking. That is not an answer, because I don't have one yet. Jonah closed the folder. We move them with Mara in the same vehicle as the puppies. No restraint pole unless she becomes dangerous. Ortiz rides with them. Rourke nodded. Agreed. The transfer began badly. Mara recognized the metal animal control crates as soon as they entered the barn. She stood over the puppies and refused food hand signals, and Jonah's voice, when an officer rolled one crate closer, she snapped at the air without making contact. Grant's report had described exactly that behavior. Rourke watched from near the door. We cannot transport her loose. Jonah knelt 6 feet away. Give me time. The officer stopped moving the crate. Jonah placed his wool cap inside it. The puppy that had slept there the previous evening crawled toward the familiar scent. Mara blocked it gently, but her eyes followed the cap. Jonah sat beside the crate without touching the door. You watched me carry all 4, he said. You watched me bring them back. Mara's ears moved. He picked up the smallest puppy, held it against his chest long enough for Mara to inspect his hands, then placed it inside the crate on the cap. She came forward immediately. Jonah backed away. Mara entered the crate and curled around the puppy. The other 3 were placed beside her. Ortiz closed the door slowly. No one used a pole. During the drive, Jonah followed directly behind the clinic vehicle. At every stoplight, he could see Mara's silhouette through the rear window, standing whenever the vehicle slowed and lying down again when it moved. Outside the animal control station, a crowd waited behind the police barrier. Some held signs demanding North Star be closed. Others shouted that Jonah had stolen valuable dogs and endangered the town. 2 television crews pointed cameras toward the convoy. Grant stood near his attorney, offering brief statements about due process. When the rear door opened, Mara heard the noise and struck the crate door once with her shoulder. The crowd reacted as if she had attacked someone. "There," Grant said loudly. "That is the behavior we warned about." Jonah climbed into the vehicle and crouched beside the crate. "Look at me." Mara's eyes moved from the crowd to his face. He did not give a command. He rested his hand on the floor outside the bars. Her breathing slowed. The cameras captured that too, but Grant's version had already reached the audience first. Inside, Ortiz set up the puppies in a heated medical run. Mara was placed in the adjacent enclosure with an open connecting panel so she could reach them. Jonah remained until she drank water and lay down. Rourke then asked him to step into the hallway. Grant filed criminal charges, the sheriff said. Trespass, destruction of property, and felony theft, based on the dog's stated value. The county attorney is reviewing them. Are you arresting me? Not now. But I am confiscating your passport and asking you not to leave the county. Jonah almost laughed. You think I am running? I think Grant wants it to look like you might. I am removing that option from his story. Rourke held out an evidence receipt. Jonah signed it. The brass whistle remained in his pocket. When he returned to the treatment room, Elise stood beside the puppy's run with red eyes. She had been reading comments beneath the video. Some accused her of trying to extort North Star. Someone had posted the address of her apartment. You need somewhere else to stay, Jonah said. I can handle it. That isn't the question. She turned on him. You don't get to take control because you're uncomfortable. That is what Grant does. The words stopped him. Elise looked away. I spent a year telling people what was happening. Every office asked whether a veterinarian had documented it, whether I had permission to copy records, whether the animals were legally mine. Then your report appeared in every response. Your name gave them permission not to look closer. Jonah accepted the accusation without defending himself. You're right, he said. She seemed almost disappointed that he did not argue. I did not know, he continued, but my name helped him. I will say that publicly. He will destroy your business. Maybe it should be destroyed. That does not help the dogs. No, evidence does. They spent the afternoon organizing Elise's records. Her notes documented food withdrawal, water restriction, cold exposure, and forced separation. But most were personal copies without complete metadata. Grant's attorneys would call them fabricated or altered. The federal database showed Mara as deceased, yet it did not prove North Star had created the false entry. The tattoo and surgical scar supported identity, but not the abuse program. They had a living dog, 4 injured puppies, and a pattern everyone could explain away one piece at a time. Near dusk, Ortiz called Jonah into the run. The smallest puppy had stabilized. Its temperature was normal, and it had taken formula from a syringe. Jonah crouched near the gate. Mara moved between him and the puppy, sniffed his coat, then allowed him to reach through and touch the pup's back with 2 fingers. It was the first time she had permitted him to touch one while she remained beside it. That's trust, Ortiz said. That's an inspection, Jonah replied. Same thing at first. A metallic crash sounded in the hallway. Mara spun toward the door. The lights went out. Emergency lamps came on 2 seconds later, filling the station with red light. An alarm began pulsing near the ceiling. Rourke shouted from the front office that the generator had failed to start. Jonah stood. The runs have mechanical locks. Electronic releases with manual keys, Ortiz said. A second crash came from the rear entrance. Mara barked once deep and sharp. Jonah stepped into the hallway. The security camera monitor was black. Snow pressed against the rear windows. Through the emergency light, he saw the exterior door hanging partly open. Someone had cut power and forced the lock. Rourke drew his sidearm and moved toward the rear corridor. Stay here. Jonah did not follow. He returned to the runs and found Elise trying to close the manual connecting panel between Mara and the puppies. Leave it open, he said. She'll protect them better if she can move. A figure appeared behind the frosted glass of the treatment room door. Mara lunged forward, barking hard enough to rattle the run panels. The figure disappeared. Rourke reached the rear entrance, but found only boot prints leading into the blowing snow. A county maintenance box had been opened. The generator fuel valve was closed, and the starter cable had been pulled free. Whoever did this knew the building, he said. The station regained power 10 minutes later. Nothing appeared missing. That made Jonah more uneasy, not less. He inspected the treatment room, the evidence cabinet, and the runs. Mara paced along one wall, stopping repeatedly near the floor drain beneath the puppy's enclosure. She sniffed, scratched once, and looked back at Jonah. "What is it?" Elise asked. Jonah knelt beside the drain. A faint chemical smell rose through the grate, sharp and sweet. Ortiz came closer and immediately covered the puppy's water bowls. Cleaning solvent, too concentrated. Someone had poured it into the drain either to create fumes or contaminate the room. Rourke ordered the animals moved to the front examination area while the ventilation system cleared the air. For the second time in a day, Mara watched strangers lift her puppies into carriers. This time she resisted. She struck the gate, caught one officer's sleeve without biting skin, and pulled back. The officer shouted. Another reached for a control pole. "No," Jonah said. Mara heard the tension and drove forward again. The pole looped around her neck. She twisted, panicked, and slammed into the metal wall. The puppies began crying. Jonah grabbed the pole shaft before the officer could tighten it. "Release the loop. She's attacking. She's trapped. Release it." Rourke stepped in. "Do it." The officer loosened the cable. Mara backed into the corner coughing. She looked at Jonah, but the trust in her eyes was gone. When he reached toward the latch, she showed her teeth for the first time. He stopped. Grant Story had manufactured the exact animal he claimed she was. By midnight, the fumes were gone, and the dogs had been moved again. Rourke placed an armed deputy in the hallway and sealed the rear entrance. Elise sat in the front office, wrapped in a county blanket. Ortiz monitored the puppies. Jonah remained outside Mara's run. She would not come near him. He placed food inside and stepped back. She ignored it. He gave no commands. He did not say her name. Every attempt to soothe her would have been another demand. At 2 a.m, Elise brought him coffee. "You should sleep," she said. "So should you. I keep seeing the pole around her neck." Jonah stared at the run. "She looked at me before they put it on. That wasn't your fault. I brought her here. The court brought her here." I agreed. Elise sat beside him. "You cannot make every bad outcome belong to you. I signed the report." "Yes, you did." There was no comfort in her answer, but there was honesty. Near dawn, Mara finally ate. She waited until Jonah had moved 20 feet away and turned his back. Then she carried the food to the puppies, as she had in the barn. The behavior told him the fear had returned to its oldest shape. Food could vanish. People could change. Safety was temporary. Rourke entered with a printed access log from the station's backup system. Someone had used an employee code at the rear door during the outage. The code belonged to an animal control assistant named Brett Lawson, who also worked weekends for North Star. "We are bringing him in," Rourke said. "But there is another problem." He handed Jonah a copy of a state order received minutes earlier. The animals were to be transferred that afternoon to a contracted veterinary facility in Casper, pending jurisdiction review. The selected carrier was North Star Working Dogs, the registered owner. "Grant gets transport control," Elise said. Rourke nodded. "Unless we produce evidence establishing immediate criminal custody before noon. We have the condition reports. Enough for neglect charges, perhaps. Not enough to prove the identity fraud or a larger program. His attorneys will argue the cold exposure was an employee failure during the storm." Jonah looked at Mara. She stood at the rear of the run, keeping her body between the puppies and the hallway. They needed the original records. Elise spread her notes across the desk. "There may be one place Grant did not search." "Where?" Jonah asked. She hesitated. "Your barn." He frowned. "The night I realized he was deleting clinic backups, I copied a drive and drove to your property. You were away. I put it somewhere I thought North Star would never look." "Where in the barn?" "Under the old tack room floor. Third board from the west wall." Jonah remembered Mara scratching at that exact place before the seizure. The dog had smelled something beneath the boards. Elise looked at the clock. If the drive still works, it may contain the full medical archive. Rourke called for a deputy to take them to Jonah's property. Before Jonah left, he approached Mara's run one last time. She did not come forward. He placed his wool cap near the gate, the one a puppy had slept in, and stepped away. Mara watched him leave it. As Jonah reached the hallway door, he heard claws scrape softly against concrete. He turned. Mara had taken the cap in her mouth. She carried it to the puppies, placed it among them, and stood facing away from him. It was not forgiveness. It was only proof that some part of her still remembered he had once brought warmth. The third floorboard came up with less resistance than Jonah expected. That frightened him. The old tack room had been built with square nails and boards thick enough to hold a horse's weight. Jonah used a pry bar while Elise knelt beside him with a flashlight. The west wall still carried faint marks where bridles once hung. Outside, Deputy Cole kept the patrol SUV running because the temperature had fallen below 10 degrees. When the board lifted, a narrow cavity appeared between two joists. Inside lay a weatherproof pouch wrapped in a feed store receipt. Elise released a breath. I thought he might have found it. Jonah pulled the pouch free. The zipper was sealed with wax. A small solid-state drive rested inside beside a red nylon collar and a metal identification plate that had been cut in half. The collar was sized for an adult German Shepherd. Jonah turned the plate beneath the flashlight. One side carried only the end of a number, 7,146. The other held 4 stamped letters. Mara Elise sat back on her heels. I found the collar in the clinic trash after Grant ordered her records destroyed, she said. He told me the dog had been transferred to a hospice adopter. 2 weeks later, the federal database listed her as dead. Why hide it here? Your security report said the barn was outside North Star's controlled network and had no permanent camera coverage. Grant kept a copy of every consultant's sitemap. I assumed he would search my apartment, my car, and the clinic. I did not think he would search the property of a man he trusted. Jonah looked at the cut plate in his palm. A man Grant trusted. The description felt worse than being called negligent. They carried the drive to the workbench. Jonah used an old laptop that had never connected to North Star's network. The device requested a password. Elise entered the date she had been fired. Access denied. She tried Mara's tattoo number. Access denied. I encrypted it in a hurry, she said. I used something I would remember. What did you lose that day? Elise looked at him. People choose passwords from what matters, Jonah said. What did you think Grant had taken from you? She stared at the keyboard. Then she typed 4 words without spaces. I could not save them. The drive opened. Folders filled the screen. Clinic scans. Breeding logs. Shipping manifests. Camera exports. A directory labeled Temperament Development contained spreadsheets organized by litter number. Each record tracked food access, light exposure, temperature, separation, intervals, startle responses, recovery time, bite pressure, and what Grant called maternal amplification. The puppies were not being evaluated after birth. They were part of the method before they were born. Elise opened Mara's file. The earliest document came from a military retirement transfer 14 months earlier. Mara had served for 6 years as an explosives detection dog attached to a joint logistics unit. She suffered a chest injury during an overseas deployment, recovered and completed 2 additional years of stateside work. Her retirement instructions specified placement with a former handler named Thomas Bell. A second document showed that Bell died of a heart attack 6 days before the scheduled transfer. North Star had offered temporary boarding. That is how they got her, Elise said. The next pages showed a chain of authorizations signed through a contractor that no longer existed. Mara's ownership moved from federal custody to the temporary boarding company, then to North Star's breeding division. A veterinary death certificate was filed on the same day as the final transfer. The certificate listed complications from a thoracic tumor. The attached scan belonged to a different dog. Jonah enlarged the image. The patient marker in one corner read, female age 11. Mara had been 6. Grant did not just lie about her death, he said. He replaced the medical image. Elise opened the metadata. The certificate had been uploaded from a user account registered to Dr. Calvin Hume, North Star's contracted veterinarian. The scan itself came from a clinic in Utah. Hume may claim Grant used his login, she said. Then we need the access records. A folder named Admin contained copies of system audit reports. Jonah recognized the vendor logo. It was the independent backup company he had required in his security assessment. The account list showed 2 administrators. The vendor held one. Grant Voss held the other. Jonah's final report specifically stated that North Star personnel did not possess administrator privileges. He read the sentence on the screen, then found the signed certification in the drive. The document matched the copy Rourke had shown him, but an attached email chain did not. Grant had written to the vendor 3 days before Jonah's follow-up inspection. Temporary display account needed for consultant demonstration. Remove after sign-off. The vendor technician replied that the access would remain active until Northstar confirmed removal. Northstar never confirmed. Grant had built a false condition solely for Jonah's visit. "He used you," Elise said. Jonah shook his head. "He gave me something easy to believe. I did the rest." That distinction mattered. Blame could identify what Grant had done. Responsibility identified what Jonah would do next. Deputy Cole entered from the barn aisle. "Sheriff says state transport moved up. They may reach the animal station before 11. Jonah checked the time. 9:43. "Can you send him the drive?" Cole asked. "Not as one file. Too large, and we need to preserve the original." Elise began copying key folders to 2 blank drives. Jonah called Rourke and summarized the findings. "I need enough for probable cause," the sheriff said. "Not a theory. Send the falsified death certificate, the administrator, email, and any video showing deliberate mistreatment. We're looking. You have 40 minutes before the transfer team arrives." Jonah opened the camera export directory. Most clips were ordinary kennel footage. Feeding, cleaning handlers, walking dogs between runs. Others had been renamed with codes. Elise recognized several litter numbers. They selected Mara's current cycle. The first clip showed the blue tarp being tied over the cage 19 days earlier. Mason Pike carried 2 water bowls into view, placed one inside, then removed it after Grant spoke to him off camera. The second showed a Northstar employee attaching a chemical hand warmer beside the temperature probe. The third had no sound. Mara stood in the cage at night, snow blowing under the tarp. 4 newborn puppies pressed against her stomach. A worker opened the door, removed food, and waited while she tried to follow. When Mara stepped forward, the worker struck the cage with a metal rod, forcing her back. Elise turned away. Jonah kept watching. He had learned long ago that evidence did not become less true because a decent person refused to see it. He wrote down timestamps while the clips played. Food removed. Water withheld. Heater disabled. Puppies separated for timed intervals. Mara reacting to their cries. Grant, observing from behind the camera. In one recording, Grant's voice was clear. "Do not reward calm. We need the protective response to peak before feeding." Mason asked, "What if the female crashes?" "Then the litter fails selection." The sentence ended any claim that neglect had resulted from the storm. Elise sent the clip to Rourke. A progress bar crawled across the screen. At 90%, the barn lights flickered. Jonah unplugged the laptop from the wall before the power could surge. The battery held. Outside, the deputy's radio sounded. Someone had reported a vehicle parked near the upper tree line. "Grant knows we came here," Elise said. "He knows where you hid the drive." "Not unless he heard me at the station." Jonah thought of the outage, the forced rear door, and the fact that nothing had appeared missing. The intruder might not have entered to steal. He might have placed a listening device. Jonah searched the document case, Elise's coat, and the county blanket she had carried from the station. Taped beneath the cardboard spine of the case was a black transmitter, smaller than a coin. Elise stared at it. That case was locked in evidence. Brett Lawson had access. Deputy Cole bagged the device. The video finished sending. Rourke called back 30 seconds later. "That is enough for a criminal hold. I am suspending transfer and requesting a warrant for Northstar." Elise closed her eyes. Jonah did not feel relief yet. Secure the puppies away from any Northstar employee. Already moving them to the front office. Ortiz is with them. And Mara. A pause. She will not enter the transport crate. Do not force her. Jonah, I have 6 people in a building built for 3. A crowd outside and a state carrier demanding release under court order. I need you here. They left the barn with the original drive sealed in an evidence pouch. Deputy Cole drove. Jonah sat in the rear seat beside Elise, watching the snowbanks pass. The road into town had narrowed to one plowed lane. A tractor-trailer idled at the intersection near the animal station. Its side displayed the logo of Mountain States Veterinary Transport, but the cab carried temporary plates. "That is early," Cole said. Jonah looked at the driver. Mason Pike sat behind the wheel. That is not a state carrier, Jonah said. Cole reached for his radio. The truck pulled away from the station. Through the small rear windows, Jonah saw 4 plastic crates. One puppy pressed against the door of the nearest. They have them, Elise said. Cole accelerated, but the patrol SUV fishtailed on packed snow. The transport truck turned east toward the industrial road, instead of south toward Casper. Rourke's voice came over the radio. All units unauthorized removal from county custody. Vehicle heading east. White tractor trailer. North Star personnel involved. Do not force a stop on ice. Jonah stared at the shrinking truck. Where is Mara? Rourke answered after a burst of static. Still at the station. They took the puppies during the confusion at the front entrance. Ortiz tried to stop them. One employee displayed paperwork that appeared to carry my signature. Forged. Yes, Mason's truck reached the industrial crossing just as the freight warning lights began to flash. It crossed ahead of the train. Cole braked on the far side. Steel cars thundered between them, blocking pursuit. Jonah watched through gaps in the passing freight. The truck turned north beyond the tracks. North, not toward Casper. Toward North Star's private transfer warehouse near the old mineral road. Elise knew it too. The cold storage building. Grant used it for out-of-state pickups. Rourke ordered units to the warehouse, but the main county road was blocked by the train and the secondary route had not been plowed. How long? Jonah asked. 30 minutes at best, Cole said. The puppies cannot regulate their temperature. The truck is heated. Jonah looked at the temporary plates, the unmarked rear doors, and Mason's face behind the windshield. We do not know that. The train continued. At the station, Grant had created noise, with attorneys, cameras, and conflicting orders. While everyone argued over lawful custody, Mason had used forged documents to remove the only living evidence that could prove the breeding cycle. The drive exposed the program. The puppies connected it to the present crime. Without them, Grant could call the files stolen, altered, or historical. He could say Mara's litter had died during an unlawful rescue. He could turn Jonah's intervention into the cause. Jonah opened the evidence copy on the laptop and searched shipping manifests for the warehouse address. One file listed a pickup scheduled for that afternoon. Buyer, Sentinel Ridge Security, Nevada. 4 juvenile dogs. Price, $96,000 contingent on verified high drive lineage. The puppies were not old enough for sale, transport, or any honest evaluation. The paperwork listed them as 16 weeks. He changed their ages, Elise said. Jonah opened the attached photographs. They were not Mara's puppies. They showed 4 older dogs with similar markings photographed against a white wall. Grant intended to ship the real litter under false identities. A note in the margin read, "Damn, not included. Disposition after transfer." Elise read it and went pale. Disposition means euthanasia. Jonah thought of Mara standing inside the run, facing the hallway, unable to hear where her puppies had gone. The train's final car passed. Cole accelerated across the tracks. Jonah called Ortiz. She answered breathlessly. Barking filled the background. "Mara is trying to break the run," she said. She heard the truck leave, open the connecting corridor, and clear the room. "The puppies are gone. There is nowhere for her to go. Give her my cap. Keep her away from the windows. I am coming back for her." Elise looked at him. "The warehouse is the other direction. Grant expects us to chase the truck. The puppies are in it, and Mara can identify them, lead us inside, and force Mason to slow down if he tries to move them again." Cole shook his head. "Sheriff will not release a disputed dog into a pursuit." Jonah took out his phone and called Rourke. The sheriff answered with anger already in his voice. "Do not ask me to let you take her. Then put her in your vehicle and bring her. She is unstable. She is a retired military working dog, whose litter was just stolen. She is responding exactly as she was trained, and exactly as a mother would. That does not make her safe. No, it makes her predictable." Rourke said nothing. Jonah looked at the road ahead. Snow had begun falling again, fine and dense. The warehouse sat beside a frozen irrigation reservoir and a maze of service roads. If Grant had another vehicle waiting, deputies could search for an hour and never find the puppies. Mara would hear them. "You asked for evidence," Jonah said. "The dog is evidence. The puppies are evidence. Grant is separating them because together they prove the present cycle. Bring her under county control. I will not handle her unless you authorize it. Rourke exhaled. Return to the station. 5 minutes. Cole turned the SUV around. When they arrived, Mara had bloodied one paw against the run gate without breaking the skin deeply. Ortiz stood outside with Jonah's wool cap. The dog paced, sniffing the cap, and the empty puppy run, then searching the room again. Jonah entered alone. Mara stopped. He did not use the heel signal. He held up the red collar from beneath the tack room floor. Her nose lifted. He set the collar on the ground between them. Mara approached it slowly. She smelled the worn nylon, touched the cut identification plate, and looked at Jonah. I know your name, he said. He spoke the tattoo number once. Mara K7146. Her ears came forward. Jonah fastened the collar around her neck. She stood without resistance while he adjusted it beneath the scarred ear. Rourke watched through the doorway. The criminal hold is active, he said. Mara remains county evidence. She rides in my vehicle. You ride with Cole. Nobody improvises. Jonah nodded. Mara moved toward the exit, then stopped beside the empty puppy run. She sniffed each corner, the water bowl and the wool cap. A sound came from her chest, so low Jonah felt it more than heard it. Then she turned to the outer door. The drive had revealed that Mara was officially dead. Her puppies were being sold under false identities, and Jonah's own certification had helped protect the system that did it. But the evidence did not solve the immediate problem. Grant still had 4 living puppies in a warehouse beyond the plowed roads, and the note in his shipping file made clear that their mother was never meant to survive the day. Mara climbed into Sheriff Rourke's vehicle. The moment the door shut, she faced north. Mara began scratching at Sheriff Rourke's rear door before the warehouse came into view. The convoy had left the plowed county road 12 minutes earlier. Rourke led in his SUV. Deputy Cole followed with Jonah and Elise, and Dr. Ortiz rode behind them in the clinic vehicle. Snow packed the narrow mineral road until the tire ruts became 2 gray channels between white banks. Beyond the pines, the frozen reservoir appeared and disappeared through blowing powder. Mara's barking carried over the radio from Rourke's vehicle. She has something, Jonah said. Cole leaned toward the windshield. The building is still half a mile north. Then the puppies may not be in the building. Rourke slowed. Mara shifted from one side of his cargo area to the other, striking the window with her nose. Jonah scanned the drainage cuts beside the road. A fresh set of tire tracks left the main route and crossed a field toward the reservoir. There, he said, the tracks belonged to the transport truck. They ran behind a line of cottonwoods and vanished near an old pump house that did not appear on North Star's shipping map. Rourke turned after them. The snow deepened immediately. His SUV pushed through the first drift, then dropped into a hidden rut and stopped with the chassis resting on packed ice. Cole braked behind him. Ortiz stopped farther back. Mara threw her weight against the rear door. Rourke got out. Nobody releases her until we secure the area. Jonah climbed from Cole's vehicle and listened. At first, he heard only wind moving through dry branches. Then came a thin cry from beyond the pump house. Mara answered with one hard bark. The transport truck was parked behind the building, hidden from the road. Its engine was off. Frost already clouded the rear windows. Why shut down the heat? Elise asked. Jonah looked at the reservoir. A plowed strip led from the truck to a second vehicle on the ice, a tracked utility carrier used by ranchers and pipeline crews. Grant was preparing to move the puppies across the frozen water to the North Star warehouse by a route deputies could not block. Rourke drew his weapon. Cole, with me. Jonah, stay back. Mara will not stay back. Then keep her in the vehicle. They approached the truck from opposite sides. The rear doors were secured with a bar lock. Rourke called out for Mason Pike to show his hands. No answer. Cole opened the passenger cab. Empty. Mara barked again from the SUV. The puppies cried from inside the truck. Rourke cut the rear seal with a bolt cutter from his rescue kit. When the doors opened, cold air rolled out. 4 crates sat strapped to the floor. The puppies were alive, pressed together at the front of each carrier, but no heater operated in the compartment. Ortiz hurried forward with blankets. A shot cracked from the cottonwoods. The bullet struck the truck's rear frame and threw metal fragments across the snow. Everyone dropped. Mara slammed into the SUV door. The latch failed. She came out low and fast, crossed the field and stopped behind the truck instead of charging toward the sound. Her body placed itself between the gunfire and the puppy crates. "Mara down," Jonah called. She obeyed. That saved her life when a second shot passed above the truck bumper. Rourke shouted into the trees. "Sheriff's office. Drop the weapon." A man moved behind a cottonwood. Mason Pike stepped out with a hunting rifle held across his chest. He did not aim it, but he did not put it down. Nobody was supposed to follow the service road, he said. "Set the rifle on the snow," Rourke ordered. "Grant said you were stealing company property." "Grant is not the law." Mason looked toward the truck. "Those dogs are worth more than this whole county station. Put the rifle down." His eyes moved to Mara. That female should have been finished months ago. Jonah felt the words travel through him without heat. Anger would make him predictable. Grant depended on predictable reactions. "Why wasn't she?" Jonah asked. Mason glanced at him. "She kept producing." The admission was enough to make Elise raise her phone from behind the clinic vehicle. She was recording. Mason noticed. His rifle lifted. Cole fired once into the snow near his feet. Mason flinched, lost his footing and fell against the tree. Rourke crossed the distance before he could recover and kicked the rifle away. Cole handcuffed him while Ortiz and Elise removed the puppies from the truck. Mara remained down until Jonah gave the release signal. Then she rose and inspected each carrier, pressing her nose through the doors. The puppies became louder at her scent. "Open them," Jonah said. Ortiz shook her head. "Not here. We need to warm them slowly and check their temperatures." Mara pawed at the nearest latch. "She stays beside them," Jonah said. "Agreed." Rourke hauled Mason upright. "Where is Grant?" Mason looked toward the reservoir. The tracked utility carrier had disappeared. Fresh tread marks crossed the ice toward the warehouse on the opposite shore. Grant had used the gunfire and the hidden truck to delay them while he moved alone. "What is in the carrier?" Jonah asked. Mason said nothing. Elise opened the truck cab and found a hard case beneath the driver's seat. Inside were paper manifests, veterinary certificates, and 4 microchip injectors labeled with the identities of older dogs. "He was going to replace the puppy's chips," she said. A 5th injector lay beneath them. Its label read, MWD, Mara, K, 7146, deceased specimen disposal. Ortiz looked at Mason. "What does disposal mean?" He stared at the ground. Rourke's radio crackled. A deputy at North Star's main property reported smoke from the server building. Grant was not only fleeing, he was destroying the archive. The warehouse across the reservoir connected to the server building through a buried fiber line and backup power system. If Grant reached its control room, he could wipe the remote recordings and burn the equipment before the warrant team arrived. Rourke looked at the ice. "How thick?" Cole checked the county reservoir report on his phone. 10 inches near shore, less around the intake channel. The tracked carrier had followed a line marked by orange stakes. Grant knew the safe route. The convoy vehicles could not cross. Jonah studied the distance. Nearly a mile over open ice. The wind had erased part of the tread path already. Snow covered dark seams where water moved beneath the surface. "There is a maintenance snowmobile in the pump house," Mason said. Rourke turned on him. "Why tell us now?" "Because Grant left me here with a rifle and no way out." The response carried no remorse, only betrayal. Rourke ordered Cole to secure Mason and remain with Ortiz, Elise, Mara, and the puppies. He and Jonah entered the pump house. The snowmobile started after 3 attempts. It had 1 seat and a narrow cargo rack. "I drive," Rourke said. Jonah looked at the sheriff's injured right knee, stiff from an old patrol accident. "You cannot control it if the track kicks sideways. And you are not sworn law enforcement. Then arrest me when we get back." Rourke stared at him for 1 second, then handed him the key. They crossed the reservoir, following the orange stakes. Jonah kept the speed low enough to feel changes beneath the skis. The ice made deep, distant sounds like cables tightening below them. Halfway across the safe route curved around the intake channel. Grant's carrier tracks went straight. "He knows we will follow the markers," Jonah said. Rourke looked ahead. The tracked vehicle sat near the far shore, apparently abandoned. The orange stakes continued left. A dark line in the snow marked open-pressure ice between them and the warehouse. Grant had driven straight only until the carrier reached stable ground, then doubled back along the shore beneath the tree line. His tracks there were hidden from the reservoir. Jonah turned toward the safe route. A sharp report came from beneath the snowmobile. The ice split behind them. Rourke twisted to look. The rear track dropped 6 inches, caught the edge, and threw both men sideways. Jonah hit the ice on his left shoulder. Pain flashed through his arm. The snowmobile slid toward the crack with its engine still running. He grabbed the rear rail and held it. Water pushed black through the opening. Rourke crawled toward solid ice, then turned back. Let it go. We need it to return. We need not to drown. The crack widened. Jonah released the rail. The snowmobile tipped rear, first hung for a moment, and disappeared beneath the ice with a hiss of steam. They lay flat and crawled along the marked route to shore. The warehouse stood 200 yards uphill. Smoke drifted from a vent near the roof. Grant's tracked carrier was hidden behind a row of fuel tanks. Jonah's left arm would not lift above his waist. Rourke checked his radio. Water had killed it. They had no communication, no vehicle, and no way to warn the team behind them that the safe route had fractured. Grant had gained the failure he needed. By the time they reached the warehouse, the side door was locked. Jonah used his shoulder against it, once felt the old injury tear wider, and stopped. Rourke drew his pistol. Back, he fired into the latch, then kicked the door open. Inside, alarms sounded beneath the roar of ventilation fans. The building held stacked crates, training equipment, feed pallets, and a glass-walled control office overlooking the floor. Smoke came from a server cabinet inside the office. Grant stood beside it with a fuel can. He had removed his coat. His shirt sleeves were rolled neatly to the elbows, as if he were conducting routine maintenance. "You should not have crossed the ice," he said. Rourke aimed at him. "Step away from the fuel." Grant smiled. "The evidence on those drives was obtained illegally. Destroying my own equipment is not a confession. The puppies were removed from county custody with forged documents by an employee acting without authorization. Mason says otherwise." For the first time, Grant's confidence flickered. Jonah noticed a bank of monitors behind him. Most screens were black, but one showed the animal station hallway from the previous night. Another showed Jonah's barn. A third displayed the cage behind North Star. The independent backup had never been independent. Grant had watched everything. "You selected the camera angles for the public video," Jonah said. "You knew the temperature reading was false. You heard the puppies. I monitored a proprietary training process. You starved a nursing dog. I measured resource defense. You froze 5 animals. I exposed a line to environmental pressure." Jonah walked closer. "You call pain by a different name and think the name changes it." Grant's eyes moved to Jonah's injured arm. "You, of all people, should understand. Selection is cruel, because failure in the field is crueler. A soft dog gets a handler killed. A fearful dog misses the threat. I built animals that continue after ordinary limits. Mara already continued after ordinary limits. You used that against her. Mara was a failed retirement asset. No handler. No placement. Expensive medical history. I gave her utility," Rourke said. "Set down the fuel can." Grant did not. "What happened to the other retired dogs?" Elise's voice came from the warehouse entrance. Everyone turned. She stood there with Deputy Cole Doctor, Ortiz, and Mara. Cole had found a maintenance route around the reservoir. Ortiz remained outside with the puppies in the heated clinic vehicle. Mara saw Grant. Her body went rigid. Grant lowered the fuel can slightly. "That dog is dangerous. She is afraid of you," Elise said. Same result. Grant reached toward the server cabinet. Mara barked. The sound made him jerk. Fuel spilled across the office floor and ran beneath a power strip. Sparks snapped from a damaged cable. Flame moved along the spill faster than anyone could cross the room. Grant dropped the can and backed into the glass wall. The fire suppression system did not activate. Jonah looked at the ceiling valves. They were closed manually, another security measure Grant had likely disabled to prevent water damage during deletion. Smoke filled the office. Rourke shouted for everyone to evacuate. Grant grabbed a portable drive from the desk and ran toward a rear stairwell. Mara pulled against Cole's lead, not chasing him but turning toward a low metal door beneath the office. From behind it came barking. More dogs. There are animals inside, Elise said. Jonah crossed to the door. It required an access card. Grant had the card clipped to his belt. He was already halfway up the rear stairs. Jonah followed. His left arm hung useless. Grant reached the catwalk, kicked a storage cart into the passage, and ran toward an exterior ladder. Jonah climbed over the cart. Smoke thickened beneath the roof. At the ladder platform, Grant turned with a metal pry bar. "You ruined yourself for animals that will never know your name," he said. Jonah stopped outside, striking distance. "That is not why you save something." Grant swung. Jonah stepped inside the arc and caught the man's wrist with his right hand. Pain shot through his shoulder as the pry bar struck the railing. Grant drove a knee into Jonah's ribs and twisted free. The portable drive skidded across the platform. Grant lunged for it. Jonah kicked it through the railing. It fell to the warehouse floor below, landing near Mara. Grant stared after it. That moment of misplaced attention cost him. Jonah drove him against the railing and locked his right arm behind his back. Grant struck Jonah's injured shoulder with his free elbow. Jonah's grip failed. Grant broke away and stepped onto the exterior ladder. The upper rung had iced over. His boot slipped. He caught the rail with both hands and hung above the loading yard. Jonah could have let him fall. The distance was not enough to guarantee death, but enough to break a spine or skull. Grant looked up, fear stripping the last calm from his face. Jonah lay on the platform and reached down with his right hand. "Take it." Grant hesitated. "Why?" he asked. "Because I am not you." Grant grabbed his wrist. Rourke reached the platform and helped pull him over the edge. The sheriff rolled Grant onto his stomach and cuffed him. Below, Elise retrieved the portable drive. Cole used Grant's access card to open the lower kennel room. 6 adult dogs were inside, each in a narrow run, frightened but alive. Mara stood at the doorway and did not enter. She looked toward the clinic vehicle outside where her puppies waited. The warehouse suppression valves were reopened. Water hammered from the ceiling and slowed the fire before it reached the kennel room. The server cabinet was damaged, but the portable drive and the remote vendor archive survived. Grant sat against the catwalk rail, soaked by sprinklers, watching smoke rise from the system he had built. "You think this proves your version?" he said to Jonah. "People need dogs that do hard things. They do not want to know what creates them." Jonah looked down at Mara. Cole had released her lead. She walked outside to the clinic vehicle, where Ortiz opened the rear doors. The 4 puppies cried at once. Mara climbed in, checked every crate, and lay across the threshold until Ortiz opened them one by one. "No," Jonah said. "People trusted you to know the difference between training and cruelty. You counted on them not looking." Rourke led Grant down the stairs. At the warehouse entrance, Mason Pike sat handcuffed in a patrol vehicle. He turned his face away as Grant passed. The partnership had ended exactly where Grant's strategy always ended. Every person became disposable when protecting the system required it. Jonah stepped outside. His shoulder had begun swelling beneath his coat. Snow struck his face and melted against the heat coming from the open warehouse doors. Mara stood in the clinic vehicle over the 4 puppies. The smallest had climbed onto her front leg. She licked its head, then looked at Jonah. He raised no hand signal. After a moment, Mara stepped down from the vehicle and crossed the snow to him. She stopped at his right side where a trained dog would heel, but she did not look for a command. She leaned her shoulder against his knee. Jonah placed his good hand against the red collar, bearing the name someone had tried to cut away. Behind them, deputies carried the surviving server drives into the snow. The immediate fight was over. The cost had only begun. The hearing room was too small for everyone who wanted to see Grant Voss answer for Northstar. 3 weeks after the warehouse, fire-folding chairs filled the county building from the witness tables to the rear wall. Reporters stood in the hallway. Former Northstar employees occupied one side of the room, while buyers, contract representatives, and families who had adopted dogs from the company sat on the other. Several held folders containing veterinary bills and registration papers they no longer trusted. Jonah waited outside until the clerk called his name. His left arm rested in a sling beneath a dark jacket. The fall on the reservoir had torn an old repair in his shoulder, and surgery was scheduled for the following month. He carried no notes. The brass whistle remained in his pocket where it had been through every interview and deposition. Grant sat beside two attorneys at the respondents' table. Without the North Star coat and the authority of his property around him, he looked smaller. He still held himself straight. He still arranged every document into exact alignment. The administrative judge asked Jonah to state his name and occupation. Jonah Mercer, independent security consultant, retired Navy SEAL. One of Grant's attorneys rose. Mr. Mercer, is it accurate that your consulting certification has been suspended? Yes, because you admitted failing to verify North Star's camera access controls. Because I signed a report stating the controls were independent when I had verified only the physical demonstration and the documents presented to me. So your work was negligent. Jonah looked at the attorney. It was incomplete. Grant Voss created a temporary condition to deceive the inspection. I should still have checked with the vendor directly. The attorney paused. He had expected resistance, not agreement. Your failure benefited North Star, did it not? Yes, and now blaming North Star protects your reputation. Nothing I say here protects my reputation. The room became quiet. Jonah continued before the attorney could interrupt. My name appeared on a report that North Star used to dismiss complaints. People trusted it. I did not know how it was being used, but I gave Grant the tool. That is my responsibility. It is also why I am here instead of allowing my lawyer to negotiate a private statement. Grant leaned toward his attorney and whispered. The judge asked Jonah to describe the cage. He did not dramatize it. He gave the temperature condition of the water bowl position of the heater placement of the false probe physical condition of Mara and behavior of the puppies. He explained the hand signal Mara obeyed and the damaged identification tattoo. When the county attorney played the full camera footage, Jonah watched the screen instead of Grant. The video showed Mason removing water. It showed the hand warmer taped beside the probe. It showed Mara carrying food to the puppies after 2 days without a meal. It showed Grant standing outside the cage and instructing an employee not to reward calm behavior. A woman in the rear row began crying quietly. Grant's attorney objected to the phrase 2 days without a meal, arguing that the timestamps could have been altered. Elise Warren took the witness chair next. She wore a plain navy suit and kept both hands flat on the table. She described the clinic logs, the false death certificate, the altered ages, and the pressure inheritance program. The attorney tried to portray her as a resentful former employee. You copied company records in violation of policy, he said. Yes, you hid them on private property. Yes, you held personal hostility toward Mr. Voss after termination. Elise looked at Grant. I held fear. The hostility came later. A few people laughed, but she did not. The attorney displayed an email in which Elise had written that she wanted to ruin North Star. Those were your words. They were. I wrote them after watching a dog chew through part of her tongue during a separation test. I wanted the program ended. At the time, I did not care what happened to the company. So, you were not objective. No one who saw that should have been objective. The judge allowed the answer to stand. Dr. Ortiz testified about hypothermia, dehydration, repeated pregnancy, pressure wounds, and the absence of any legitimate veterinary protocol supporting the conditions shown. Sheriff Rourke testified about the forged transport order, the outage at the animal station, the transmitter hidden in Elise's case, and Grant's attempt to burn the server cabinet. Then Grant chose to testify. His attorneys advised against it. Everyone in the room could see them speaking to him in urgent whispers. Grant listened, adjusted one cuff, and took the witness chair anyway. Control had been his strength. It became the error that ended him. North Star supplied dogs for dangerous work, he began. Police departments, infrastructure facilities, and private security teams depended on animals capable of functioning under stress. The public enjoys simple words like kindness and cruelty. The field is not simple. The county attorney approached. Was Mara deprived of food? She underwent controlled resource exposure. Was water removed for measured intervals? Was the heater turned off in sub-freezing weather? Temperature variation was part of environmental conditioning. Were her 4 puppies present? Maternal behavior was one of the responses observed. The attorney let the silence sit. Did an independent veterinary review approve that program? Grant looked toward Dr. Ortiz. Mainstream veterinary practice does not understand operational selection. That is not an answer. No independent review was required under the breeding license. Did one approve it? No. The attorney displayed the shipping manifest, listing the 5-week-old puppies as 16 weeks old. Why were their ages changed? The manifest used projected delivery ages. The pickup was scheduled for that day. The contract allowed later delivery. Then why were replacement microchips in the truck? Grant's eyes moved to Mason Pike, who sat with his own attorney near the door. I did not authorize that. The county attorney played a warehouse recording recovered from the portable drive. Grant's voice instructed Mason to complete the identity transfer before the Sentinel Ridge buyer arrived. Grant's face did not change, but one hand closed against the table. Is that your voice? The context is incomplete. Is it your voice? Yes, the attorney displayed the notation concerning Mara. Disposition, after transfer. What disposition had you planned? She had a documented aggression history and chronic medical issues. Euthanasia. Humane termination following evaluation. Someone in the audience said, "Say the word." The judge called for order. Grant looked toward Jonah. A dog cannot be allowed to become more valuable than the people it may fail to protect. Jonah did not answer. He had learned that not every accusation deserved his defense. Sometimes the truth had already filled the room. At the end of the hearing, the judge revoked North Star's breeding and transport licenses, ordered the seizure of all animals and records, and referred the fraud findings for federal prosecution. Grant remained under criminal indictment for animal cruelty, evidence, destruction, forgery, conspiracy, and unlawful removal of evidence. Mason had agreed to cooperate in exchange for consideration at sentencing. Dr. Hume's veterinary license was under emergency suspension. The judge then addressed Jonah's certification. Mr. Mercer, your cooperation does not erase the professional failure you admitted. Public trust depends on more than good intentions after harm is discovered. I understand. Your license remains suspended for a minimum of 3 years. Any future reinstatement will require retraining, independent review of your prior active certifications, and disclosure of this matter to clients. Jonah felt the loss settle into place. His consulting work had paid the mortgage, funded his health insurance, and allowed him to live without answering to anyone. 3 years might end it permanently. At 55, with another shoulder surgery ahead, starting over was not an inspiring phrase. It was an expensive and uncertain fact. Do you accept those conditions? The judge asked. Yes, Grant turned as deputies approached to escort him from the room. For the first time since North Star's rear lane, he and Jonah looked directly at each other. They will forget this in 6 months, Grant said. Then they will buy from someone who does the same thing with better paperwork. Jonah stood aside so the deputies could pass. Maybe, he said. But they will look at the paperwork now. Grant had no answer to that. Outside the county building, cameras waited for Jonah. He left through the side exit instead. Elise found him near the maintenance lot, where snowmelt ran beneath a row of dirty trucks. They want a statement, she said. You should give one. They want you. The best thing in this story is not mine. Elise studied him, then nodded. She walked back toward the front steps, where Dr. Ortiz and Sheriff Rourke waited. Jonah remained beside the maintenance trucks while they spoke about the dogs, the reporting failures, and the need for independent oversight. No one mentioned heroism. That was right. 4 months later, the North Star sign came down. The county could not afford to operate the entire property, and no private buyer wanted the liability. A coalition of veterinarians, veterans, ranchers, and rescue groups leased the heated kennel building for $1 a year. They named it Bell House, after Thomas Bell, the handler who had been meant to receive Mara in retirement. Jonah refused the first 3 requests to join the board. He accepted a key instead. The work suited him better than meetings. He repaired gates with his right arm while the left recovered. He replaced the false temperature system with simple sensors that sent readings to 3 independent accounts. Every kennel had a manual gauge mounted at eye level because technology was not a substitute for walking into the room and looking at the animal. Elise became Bell House's operations manager. On her first day, she hung the cut half of Mara's identification plate inside a glass case near the entrance. Beneath it was a small card explaining that records could be altered, names could be removed, and living evidence still had a way of surviving. Dr. Ortiz volunteered twice a week. Sheriff Rourke arranged for deputies to receive training on animal cruelty evidence and emergency custody. He never discussed the November complaint packet publicly, but an internal investigation found it had been signed for by Brett Lawson and placed in a closed file without review. Lawson pleaded guilty to evidence tampering and lost his county position. The 6 adult dogs from the warehouse entered rehabilitation programs. 2 would never be safe for ordinary adoption, not because they were born wrong, but because people had trained fear into every doorway and hand movement. Bell House kept them in permanent sanctuary with handlers who understood that progress might mean accepting food in the presence of a person, not becoming somebody's perfect pet. Mara and the puppies occupied the corner run with access to a fenced snow yard. They stayed together longer than ordinary placement schedules recommended. Ortiz believed the puppies needed stability more than speed. The first, a broad-chested female with a white mark beneath her chin, left at 6 months to live with an older couple who had trained search and rescue dogs for 30 years. Mara inspected both people, their vehicle, and the blanket in the rear seat before allowing the puppy to climb in. The second went to a retired firefighter who visited Bell House every day for 3 weeks before touching him. The third remained with Elise. The smallest puppy, the one who had stopped shivering in the cage, developed a mild heart condition. He would never become a working dog. A widowed school custodian named Frank Dwyer adopted him and called him Button because one ear never stood completely straight. When Frank carried Button toward his truck, Mara followed to the gate. She watched until the taillights disappeared. Then she returned to Jonah and sat beside his right leg. She grieved each departure in her own way. For a day or two she checked the empty sleeping place and carried part of her food there. No one tried to distract her from it. Loss did not become kinder when people rushed it. Jonah understood that. He also understood that the puppies had not been taken. Mara had watched each person arrive, return, wait, and earn trust. She had seen every puppy leave, warm awake, and held by someone whose hands she had inspected. The community held an opening ceremony for Bell House in early autumn. Folding tables stood in the training yard. Veterans brought food. Ranchers finished the last fence section. Children were not part of the program that day. The recovering dogs needed a controlled environment, and Bell House kept the rule, even when donors complained. Jonah stayed near the rear gate, tightening a hinge that did not need tightening. Elise found him there after the speeches. "You missed Rourke thanking you," she said. "I heard enough of Rourke talking during the hearing. He practiced that speech. That was his first mistake." She smiled. "Your shoulder. Good enough. Your license appeal." I withdrew it. Elise's smile faded. "You could have applied next year." "I could. Why didn't you?" Jonah looked across the yard. Dr. Ortiz was showing Frank how to check Button's pulse. The retired firefighter sat on the ground while his puppy climbed over his boots. Rourke carried chairs with 2 other volunteers. Mara moved among them without a leash, pausing at each familiar person before returning to the open kennel door. "I spent a long time believing responsibility meant getting back what I lost," Jonah said. "Sometimes it means accepting the loss and doing the next useful thing." Elise stood beside him. "The board still has an empty seat. Keep it empty. Builds character." She laughed and left him with the hinge. That evening, after the tables were folded and the last truck turned onto the county road, Jonah walked Mara home. She had never been formally assigned to him. The court transferred ownership to Bell House, and Bell House allowed her to choose where she slept. For the first month, she stayed at the center. Then she began following Jonah to his pickup at closing time. He would open the passenger door and she would decide. Most nights she climbed in. The first snow of the season began while they were on the road. At Jonah's barn, Mara inspected the tack room where the puppies had once slept. The towels were gone. The wool cap had been washed and placed on a shelf, though one corner still carried small tooth marks. Jonah filled 2 bowls, one with water and one with food. He set them near the heater and went outside to bring in firewood. When he returned, Mara had not eaten. She stood beside the food bowl, with it held carefully between her teeth. For months, she had carried food toward puppies who were no longer there. Jonah put down the wood. Mara walked to him and placed the bowl at his boots. Then she turned back to the heater, circled once on the old horse pad, and lay down. She did not check the empty corners. Jonah sat beside her. Snow tapped against the barn windows. The brass whistle slipped from his pocket and landed on the concrete between them. Mara looked at it. Jonah left it where it fell. After a while, she rested her head across his boot and closed her eyes. He did not give a command. For 19 days, Mara pushed every scrap of food toward her puppies before taking anything for herself. Months later, when the last puppy was safe, she carried a full bowl to Jonah's boots and finally walked away from it. Healing did not arrive as a grand victory. It arrived when she no longer needed to guard an empty corner and when Jonah stopped believing every loss had to be undone before he could move forward. Sometimes peace begins with one small act of trust, setting down what you have carried and believing it will still be there when you return. If Mara's story stayed with you, share what her final choice meant to you.